Hello, thank you for joining Automation Hour. All right, so if this is the first time that you are joining, all lines are muted. Please post your questions to Salesforce Automation Hour on the Trailblazer community. We will be posting a link to the deck as well as the recording sometime after the session. And you'll find that on the Salesforce Automation Hour Trailblazer community, Twitter, and our website, automationhour.com. So if you haven't signed up for the sessions for the rest of the year, we're fully booked out. So even if you can attend live, definitely sign up and then you will get the link to the recording after it's posted. So we have some great MVPs who will be presenting as well as folks in the community. So definitely sign up. And if you have a business use case with the cool process automation solution, definitely reach out to us and we will book you into 2020. Wow, 2020. All right, and we cannot bring this free webinar series to you without our sponsor, Concrete.io. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And here are your hosts, David Litton, myself, and Rakesh Gupta from Dreamforce a couple years ago. And if you like to see us in an upcoming event, Rakesh will be at Texas Dreamin' next week, and the three of us will be at Midwest Dreamin' in August. So come stop by, say hi. And with that, I am happy to have Jeff on here to present. He has a pretty cool use case. So with that, I am going to hand over to Jeff. You should have control now.
All right, thank you so much. So let me share and I'll continue the presentation. So my name is Jeff Kranz. I work for an OEM partner of Salesforce called Risk Connect. We're actually one of the first partners of this kind back in the 2000s, and so I get an interesting view. It's kind of straddles the line between being a direct customer and being an ISV, where we do a lot of direct configuration and custom work in orgs directly and in managed packages. And my role at that organization is kind of straddling everything. My title, I work on the product services team, where I somewhat of an internal consultant. I help when implementation teams or customer service teams or product teams run into issues. I help make sure that product designs are following new features that Salesforce platform offers, and I love my job because I get to spend a lot of time in Salesforce, and I'm really excited to work with to guest host this webinar. Flows are a really cool tool, and I think anytime I have a chance to be an advocate of flows, I do it, and so I'm excited to step through just one use case to kind of get everyone's brains churning around how you can use flows to do what in the past may have required custom development.
Jeff, sorry to interrupt, but you're not sharing your screen.
Yeah, it's not just
okay, excellent.
There you go. Didn't click the last button there. Thank you. So I don't have a lot of certificates like some of the other folks, but I did get Partner of the Month back in December on the partner community, so I'm proud of that. So what are we going to talk about today? What I'm going to talk through is a business use case for flows. I'm going to talk through some of the different possible solutions that may require Apex, and then we'll kind of go through the thought process of how you might approach this, and then apply that to actually building a flow. So I'm going to open up an org and actually build out what might have taken days in code. And so what I hope you take away from this is just the more practice you have weighing code versus declarative solutions, I think the better off you are. It's just that thought process of what are the ins and outs. Declarative is a very powerful tool, but you always want to be thinking about what the alternatives are, and making sure you're making the best choice for either your organization or your customer. And then and just even if this case isn't directly applicable to something that you're doing, just getting your brain thinking about creatively utilizing the tools that Flow provides. And so I'll be specifically taking advantage of pause elements in this one. All right, so what is the use case that we'll be talking about? We often work with managed packages that deliver some kind of requirement for our organization or for our customers, and so sometimes that managed package does everything that you want it to do, and sometimes that managed package does almost everything you want it to do, and there's one little thing it doesn't quite do, but your users really need it to do that last thing. And so when you're working with managed packages, you can sometimes be limited into what it is you can actually customize or extend about that managed package. And what I really like about the tools that Salesforce continues to provide and enhance is that they're giving us more ways to extend and close those gaps ourselves. And so the use case here is that we've got a managed package. The org I'll be working in isn't actually a managed package, but you can use your imagination. But we've got a managed package with a managed object, and what the managed package does is it generates a PDF attachment on a record once a status field is set to completed. And so our users love it, they think it's great, but what they need out of it is once that, as part of that process of getting set to completed, they want an email sent with that attachment. And so there's a wrinkle there in that the PDF that attachment is generated asynchronously, because that's not going to happen as part of some kind of synchronous transaction. So the record gets saved, gets changed to completed, and we don't have an attachment yet at that point. And so we need a way to send that email with that PDF attached. So we need to wait on sending that until it's attached. And we could just say, send it in an hour or send it tomorrow and hope that it's there. But the users want it right as soon as it's available, and they don't want to have to wait. So what can we do? We could implement a trigger on the attachment object. And so backing up a little bit, this managed package is a little bit old. They aren't using files yet. We've contacted the developer and they're going to work on it, but it's not ready yet. So they're using attachments. And so this attachment, we could put a trigger on the attachment object. There are ways to, we have to be careful about the logic here to make sure that one, we can tell that the attachment is attached specifically to our type of object, because an attachment could be attached anywhere. So we have to make sure that we are only executing this logic when it's attached to records from this managed object. And we have to make sure we're working with the users and with the developer of the package to understand, well, what if other attachments get attached to that object? How are we going to know, if this is indeed a PDF that was generated from when its status was set to completed? Then another possible solution would be to implement chained queuable apex. So the idea here would be you have a trigger on that managed object, and what that does is it fires a chained queuable apex class. And what that will do is, I kind of diagram this out to make it easier to think about, is when the status gets changed to completed, I'll execute, this is the queuable apex that queries to see if the attachment is generated. If it exists, then I go ahead and send the email with that attachment. If it doesn't, then I kind of do this loop that will continue to query for it asynchronously until that attachment exists, and then I can go ahead and send it. So then what we're thinking is, we're under some deadlines, and we don't have a developer on hand, but we do have a flow expert on hand. Can we implement this with flows? Answer is yes. With the pause element in flows, you can resume a flow 0 hours after, and it essentially breaks that flow into an asynchronous transaction, separate transaction, and then we'll execute. It's not exactly immediately, but it can be up to maybe 5 minutes later. But it can also seem immediately, but it's essentially an asynchronous process that I can go ahead and, in this flow that's launched from a process builder, I can query to see if the attachment exists, and if it doesn't, I will pause it and then continue to query until it does exist and send the email. All right, so we've done a bunch of talking and diagramming. I think it's time to get into the fun stuff. So I've got this managed object here. Again, it's not actually managed, it's just, but we can pretend that it's managed. And just I'll show you around. I'll create a new record here. It's very basic. It's got a status field. The content field won't impact what we're doing here. I've got a lookup to contact here. That will be the recipient of the email. So I've laid out the screen here so you can kind of see the different things that we're going to try to accomplish, because what we want to do is we're going to be generating an attachment, so we'll see that here in the middle, and we'll also be sending emails, so we'll see that in the activity timeline here on the right. So I've already gotten part of this set up to show you, to demonstrate what I'm talking about with why we need this to be asynchronous. So I've got it set up so that, so we've got this attachment that generates, and I've tried to set up an email alert that looks for the attachment without doing the waits. And so I'll show you that here in our flow. I've got a process builder on my object that looks for the status to be completed, and it also makes sure I have a recipient. And then I launch this flow. And the flow, as I mentioned, I don't yet have the waits implemented. I'll do that live here with you. But what I'm trying to do here is I'm looking up the attachments that are related to the record I'm launching this from. And for the sake of demonstration, I'm just pulling the most recent attachment. But you're obviously in the real world, you'd have to make sure you're defining exactly how you would know which attachment to pull and what attachment to look for. But in this example, I'm just pulling the most recent attachment, and then I'm taking the ID of that attachment, putting it into a variable, and then my real shortcut here for the purposes of demonstration is I've got an invocable action that accepts record ID, template ID, recipient contact ID, and an attachment ID to send an email. So without the wait elements, if you didn't realize that the attachment was getting generated asynchronously, it might be confusing to see the results when I go ahead and set this to completed. So let's talk through what's going on here. So I set it to completed. That process builder ran to send the email. And let me refresh the screen here, and you'll also see that it generated an attachment and it sent that email. But this email, you'll notice there's no attachment icon on it because it did not find an attachment at the time that it sent this email. All right, so that's what we've got to solve for here today, is say, well, I need to wait and not send this until it gets attached. So what we can do is we can add a pause element. And so let me save a new version of this flow. So I'm going to add a pause element to this flow. I'm going to call this wait or check. I'm going to call this check for attachments. One thing that's about pause elements. So let's take a look at what we've got here when we're building a pause element. I'm going to call this check for attachments, and you'll see why I'm naming it this way. Is that when you configure a pause element, what you do is you set up conditions to say, you can set up, say, under these certain conditions, I want to wait a certain amount of time before continuing to execute this flow. And I can have a default path then that falls back to a default path. And if it doesn't meet any of the conditions I set up, then the default path doesn't pause and it goes ahead and executes. So what I can do here is this essentially is a decision element. So I don't have to have a separate decision element to say, are the attachments, did I find an attachment? I can put that decision logic directly in this pause element. So I'm going to call this pause configuration. I want to set up a condition that says, hey, I did not find an attachment, because let's think through this. I want it to go ahead and execute if it does find the attachment. So I'm going to say attachment not found. And under the conditions, I'm going to say I only have one condition I'm looking to meet, and I have a variable that I'm populating if it finds an attachment called attachment ID. And I'm going to say is null and true, which means if this attachment variable is blank, then I want to pause it. How long do I want to pause it? That's what the resume event tab, that's where the configuration for that is. And there are a number of options here. I can set a specific time. So I can say off of a hard date, or I can do it relative based off of a date field, a date time field. So I can specify a date time field on here and specify an offset from that for when this should resume. I can also have this resume based off of a platform event, which would be really helpful if I knew our managed package developer, when a process is completed, if they fire a platform event, that would come very handy here. However, what I need to do is I want it to essentially resume as quickly as possible, because I'm going to set up a loop where it's going to check for attachments. If it doesn't find it, check again and check again and check again. So I'm going to set a specific time to do this, and you can hard code a date and time in there, but what I really want to do is have it based off of the current date and time. So there's a flow global variable for the current date and time. And then I want to set the offset to be 0 hours after the current date and time. So the help bubbles here are very helpful for navigating this. I don't need any of the output values. This would be helpful if I was responding to maybe a platform event and I needed to know what time it resumed, or if there was some kind of status that I needed to use in my flow when it resumes. So I'm not going to take those variables and populate any variables with those values for this. So let's review. What I've got here is a condition for when the attachment is not found, and it will resume immediately. It will pause and then resume immediately. And then I've got a default path for when it does find an attachment. So if that attachment ID is populated, then it's going to follow the default path. And I want to change this label to make it more so I can understand what is going on in the flow when I come back later, or when someone else comes back later to look at this. So I've got this pause element. I want to insert that here between or after the attachment lookup and before the email send. So I'll delete this arrow. I'll say after I do the attachment lookup, I'm going to check for attachments, and I want to go send an email if the attachment is found, and I want to, if the attachment is not found, pause and then do the lookup again. So I like to rearrange things a little bit so I can read what's happening. Super simple, right? I look up the attachments. If it's there, go ahead and send the email. If it's not, we're going to loop until it does. Now, in the real world, you'd want to put some kind of backstop on here. You'd want to do some kind of counter or some kind of condition that it can't, that it will time out. So you're not just doing this forever if there's an error during the generation process. So let's go ahead and save this. We want to activate it. And let's go ahead and try this again. Last time we tried this, we got an email with no attachments. This time, and what I want to do here is actually show you some monitoring capability as I do this. So let's go ahead and I'm going to change the status to completed. All right. So when I look at the flows here, flows, oops, let's look at the actual flows. I'm looking at a specific flow. There's a way to monitor flows that are waiting. Now it's taking quite a while for me to get here, so it might be finished executing. Okay, so you can see I've got my send notification flow queued up. So it's part of it, it's going through its cyclical process to check and then wait and then check and then wait. Like I said, sometimes it takes a few minutes for the flow to, for the pause to resume. And that's because we're on a multi-tenant platform and we are, we've got guardrails to make sure that we don't screw up what other people are doing and that other people don't screw up what we're doing. So it executed. So I should expect now, I refresh this screen, to see both the attachment and an email, but this time with the attachment. Yes, it worked. Oh, thank goodness I did not have to go through and troubleshoot something live. So I got to send the email and you can see that icon there. It means that it included the email in the attachment. So we were able in just a few minutes to put something together with point and click tools that is functionally the same as putting together a chained queuable Apex process. And so now you don't have to worry about going and finding the trailhead for queuable Apex and troubleshooting that until you bang your head against the wall at 3 in the morning. But there are considerations that you'll need to take if you do something like this. You know, there are limits to the number of wait elements that can be processed at one time or that can be held in the queue at one time. And so you'll want to make sure that the the volume of records that will be doing this are, you'll stay within those limits. You'll want to, like I said, make sure that there's some kind of timeout mechanism that, if attachment fails to generate, that it doesn't just wait in a loop forever. You'll want to make sure, that I did a lot of kind of glossing over how to find the right attachment. I just picked the latest one. This is a bit of a simplified, contrived example, but you can start to see how you can use these tools and flows with auto-launched flows with process builders to really two things that with point and click tools that would have normally taken some pretty serious Apex architecture. So I don't see any questions on the in the GoToWebinar. I know we said to post questions in the Trailblazer community, so this afternoon I will be in there, and if you post questions, I will do my best to answer them. But I hope that this was helpful for you to see how we can really leverage these powerful tools that are on the Salesforce platform to do some neat stuff.
Okay, so we'll give folks a couple minutes to see if they have any questions that they want to post out here. I'm also on the Trailblazer community, so I'm refreshing. Oh, Matthew has a question. Can you please elaborate on the mechanism for terminating the pause element at any given point in time?
Yes, so the some kind of timeout mechanism. Absolutely. So let's go back to our flow. And there's a couple of ways you can approach the timeout. You could say, I want to limit the number of cycles that we go through. So you could do a count as you cycle here. You could do an assignment element where you're adding one every time you cycle, and part of your check will look at that counter, and you'll have a some kind of cycle limit, at which point it would drop out of the cycle. Or you can do it as a time-based timeout. So I'll show that. What I'll do here is I'll add a time-based timeout to this. So what I'll want to do is add a condition here. Just bear with me. I'm trying to make sure we do this in the most efficient way. Maybe it's best to put a decision element here, because I don't want to fight let's think of what we want it to do. We want to have a different action. We don't want to go ahead and send the email if we time out, right? We want to maybe send a different email to the admin perhaps, that lets them know that there was a problem, that it timed out. And so what I want to do here is put a decision. Say check timeout. And what I'm going to do is at the start of the flow, I'm going to add a new resource here that's a date time variable called flow start. and I'm going to create a formula variable or formula element. It's thinking. All right, well, what I'm going to do is create a formula element that will actually add my timeout amount of time to the flow start, and I will check the current time against that formula. So this is thinking a little too much. So I'm going to say flow current date time is greater than or equal to, there we go, formula, we'll call this a timeout limit, and I'll say off the top of my head, I don't recall the syntax for adding time to a date time, but you can see how you can put that together where you can create a date time that would essentially be, hey, I don't want to keep processing if it gets past 20 minutes or however long you want to limit it to. That answer the question?
Okay, we'll wait for Matthew to respond to that. Um, Jay has a question. Do you know how often the flow cycles? I'm assuming you can have it try again later if it times out.
So the cycle depends on the server load. So it could be very frequently. It could be a few minutes between cycles, depending on uh, how loaded the server is. I'm on a dev box, so it's less powerful than a production environment. But it varies. There isn't a way to predict exactly how long 0 hours after really means. But it essentially processes it, puts it in the queue for a nearly immediate processing. The real advantage here is that it separates it out into a separate transaction, so you can kind of cycle through this. As far as trying later, if it times out, I think that the intention of the timeout is to break the cycle. Something went wrong. You could certainly build some kind of retry flow that these are flows. You could just build a flow that sends the email, check, you come back and you say, oh, the attachment is there now. It didn't send before, it is there now. So you have a flow that now picks it up. You could rerun this flow and have a way to rerun it.
Great. Matthew did respond and said, yes, thank you, very helpful. Dominic has a question here. Thanks for sharing your solution today. I had to leave the webinar for a few minutes, so I apologize if you covered this. But are you able to attach the file attachment to the email notification?
So the answer to that is yes, but I think I know where you're going with this, is how did they do that? And I did gloss over that a little bit. So the out-of-the-box email alert functionality that you get on the platform doesn't give you the ability to take some arbitrary attachment and add it to the email. What kind of I shortcutted around that by creating an invocable action that accepts a record ID, an email template ID, and a recipient contact ID and an attachment ID and then sends an email with those pieces of information. Out of the box, we don't get that. I wish we did. I'm wondering if there's an unofficial flow for something similar to this. If there isn't, I think this is a good opportunity to maybe put something out there. The one I built here is very quick and dirty, doesn't have a lot of checking and error handling, and it's not very robust. It met the needs of what I wanted to demonstrate here. So I probably wouldn't be proud enough of it to put it out there, but to give you an idea of what it does, it really just takes these variables and sends an email. There's, like I said, it's not very robust. It doesn't do a lot of doesn't do any error handling or something that like this would really need to do. But it's also not a lines of code, and so you can kind of see what we're doing.
He said, thanks for the answer. We have not found a solution for attachments outside of Apex.
And what's nice about this is when you do something as an invocable method, rather than tying your Apex to a Visualforce page or tying it to something that's triggered only by a trigger, as an invocable method, you give your admins a tool that they can reuse. And so, whether it's in a screen flow that that users can trigger manually, or as part of a process builder that's done automatically, I definitely start thinking about if you're requesting some kind of development, ask if you can have it implemented as an invocable method. It also helps your dev team focus on what they need. That way they're just focused on the action that needs to be developed. They don't have to worry about building a UI around it, and all the other stuff that comes around with doing something with that's launched from say a Visualforce page or a Lightning component.
Great. All right, last round for any questions. Okay. Matthew, since there are limitations on the attachments object whereby it would not be possible to create, say, a custom field for identifying attachment type, is it safe to assume that the only mechanism when applying this in a real-world scenario for grabbing the correct attachment, if greater than one exists, would be to examine that attachment's file name?
Yeah, or the description field. The hopefully again, this is kind of a contrived scenario. In the real world, I would really hope that we're using a managed package that can add a file instead of an attachment. But in the real world, we do find that we are using these managed packages that don't get updated, and so if there's something in the description field that could help identify this attachment and the file name, as you say, and if you're going to use something like the most recently created, you really want to make sure you're kind of talking through and working through all scenarios. Make sure you've consulted the developer to make sure that, hey, this method, this approach to identifying the attachment would be, is going to be reliable. But I also want to kind of step back from being focused on the attachment selection here, because just think what I want to make sure we're thinking about is not just on attachments, but any kind of asynchronous thing that you're waiting on. This pattern is something that you can use. So if you've got some kind of process that is generating a bunch of records, and you kind of want to wait until all of those records are generated. I know in the Ohana Slack, we were recently someone was talking about that. Hey, I want to wait until I don't want to pick a specific time. I want to wait until this process is completed. And so if you can find a way to know whether or not that process is completed, this pattern can work for you.
That's great, thanks. All right, anybody else? Refresh the Trailblazer community. I haven't seen anything come through there. Nope. Well, we see if there's anything coming in. How did you learn Process Builder and Flow?
Because I had to. I've been working on the Salesforce platform for almost 7 years. And when I first started doing this, the company I was working for was pretty small, and we had to just work with what we had. I was an account manager and an implementation analyst and a project manager and a developer and an architect and account support and
all the things.
everything, all of the things. And so when I realized that when flows were starting to get become popular, or not become popular, when they were really starting to push flows, they graduated from the cloud flow or from the desktop flow builder to the cloud flow designer. I started realizing, hey, I don't need to figure out how to develop a particular solution. I can just point and click this tool. And so it was just a really helpful time-saving tool for meeting customers' needs. And looking back at where it was in Classic versus where it is today, it is light years ahead, and I can't believe how happy I was with it then compared to where it is today. I look back and I'm like, wow, I can't believe some of the things we tried to pull off on flows then. But today, with the way that it integrates with the Lightning experience, the way that you can do things asynchronously, trigger things off of platform events, you can the way that it bulkified, process builders are much better bulkified than they used to be. It's just such a powerful tool that when I see that there's updates to it, I can't help but go and learn about it and make sure it's in my toolbox.
Great. All right. I think I've refreshed the Trailblazer community several times. Don't see any other questions, and I also don't see anything in this webinar. So rather than hold everyone up, thank you, Jeff, for coming on to Automation Hour and presenting, and we hope to see you back again.
It's my pleasure. This is great. Thanks for joining, everyone. Thanks for thinking it was worth your time to hear me talk for an hour.
Thank you.
Thank you. Until next time.
Really great session. Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye now.